You do a Ronald Reagan on the microphone.
Wow.
The bombs start falling in 5 minutes.
Well, bunch.
So, welcome. It is March 28th, 2024.
Yeah.
We are opening the Kaysville Planning Commission at 7:08 p.m. Welcome. I am Commissioner Lyon. We have a quorum. We will be holding a rezone request and a public hearing tonight for a text amendment to the city code, and going in that order. We'll go to item number 2. Do we have anybody with conflict of interest on any of the items tonight? Commissioners? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 3, rezone request and public hearing for property at 1400 West Willowbrook Lane from A5 heavy agriculture to R114 single family 14,000 square foot lot for Russell Wilson. Just make it aware that this is a public we will have a public hearing as part of this, so we will at the time have the applicant come forward at that time, and then after that we will then go into the public hearing, and if there's any questions we'll have the applicant come back up after that, so for commission questions. So we'll go to that point and turn the time over to staff.
All right, this one's me. If you remember back in February 15th of 2024, they come in and rezoned that parcel there. It was the Webster farm, and it was A5, and then they rezoned it to R114. There was a little odd-shaped corner piece up there. It was it's a odd-shaped little parcel. It's non-conforming because it was A5 zone, and it's like a 0.31, or which is 13,000 square feet. If we rezone it tonight, it'll still be non-conforming, but the process is gonna, hopefully they're in process of purchasing it and then adding it to the subdivision when they do the one below, and that will probably create them a nice even line across there and give them maybe some potential more lots there. Once they do that, it will be conforming once they include it in the subdivision. If you look at our surrounding land use, the subdivision above is existing, and it's R120. The property to the west of it's going to be the R114 that they already rezoned. The beauty of this is the setbacks are the same as R120. The 30 in the front, 8 on the sides, 15 in the back. The frontage width's the same. Everything's pretty much the same, so it's going to look just like the houses above. We went through that last time. The land use map, or general plan, shows that it is all R1, and the zone of R114 with the setbacks and everything will fall in line with all the other subdivisions. Well, most subdivisions up and down the street, where both east, west, and up and down Sunset or Angel. Anyway, so up down Angel Street, they will I'll conform to the same basic setbacks and everything. Staff is recommends the zone change from A5 to R114 with support of the general plan. The compatible zone will create existing homes that are of the neighborhood character. The land use map shows that it is a single family dwelling, which they are. And I guess that's pretty much sums it all up. It'll just make more lots. Those R114 lots are gonna be kind of a gap between the R120s and the other bigger lots down through there. So hopefully it'll make kind of a varied house and a little maybe lesser price range than it would be if it was larger lots. And so staff just recommends the rezone.
Thank you, Dan. Does Commission have any questions of staff?
So the rezone that was done previously to the R114 versus the R120, the reason sort of that they had previously to do the R114 was because they couldn't purchase that piece of land. Correct?
Yes, initially they weren't purchasing. They thought they was, then they wasn't. And then when they come in, we talked about that other street that's going to stub into the street will stub into the property to the south there.
Okay.
And so that's kind of why they moved to the R114. But now Symphony is looking at that, and they're going to purchase the Webster ground, add this to it, and get some more lots.
And they will maintain that all R14, R114?
Yes, sir. They're going to go R114 throughout the subdivision, I believe.
We can ask the applicant in a minute. So let's have the applicant come up and we'll go from there. State your name and who you represent.
Yep. So I'm Jared Schmidt with Symphony Homes, Symphony Development. We have owned the piece in question for some time since we finished the Mountain Vistas subdivision that we built next door. It was just a remnant piece that didn't work, so we're holding it. Since the Webster family was interested in selling, we've been trying to purchase it, and now we're just chasing them with the rezone because it only makes sense that, since they got it rezoned, we're just matching it so that we can close on the property, then it all is together and ready. So,
Also, this is part of your due diligence process.
is this part of it?
Yeah.
No,
Oh.
it's kind of at the tail end. We hope to be able to close here shortly.
Okay.
But now that we're all ducks in a row, we can get this wrapped up.
Okay.
That's the intent. Any other questions or concerns?
Commissioners, any questions for the applicant?
Do you have any layout or plans yet, or have you even looked at that?
We've been looking at it, but we haven't been able to put it together now. That's the next step. But our intent, I believe, is just to do a through street connecting
To Angel?
the stub to Angel. So that is the plan. But you'll probably be seeing that application shortly, hopefully, as soon as we can get it done.
Okay. Cool. If there's no further questions, I'm going to open the public hearing. So we are now in public hearing. If there's anybody here to speak this agenda item, we'll open that up. Let it sit for a second. Seeing as there's nobody here, we will close the public hearing on this agenda item and we will move into discussion. Commissioners, any discussion on this item?
Was there any public comment or
No,
interest?
we've.
I received nothing either. It's quiet.
Okay. Commissioner Hall.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Okay. Do I have a second? Oh,
Well, we're actually recommending approval, right?
recommending
Yeah, to the
approval.
council.
Yes. I'll make, can I clarify? Let me start over.
Why don't we, yeah, go ahead.
Start over. I'd like to make a recommendation that we approve the rezone petition in front of us as presented and as reviewed by staff upon the following findings and/or conclusions. One, it's been thoroughly reviewed by staff. The staff report makes it very clear that this petition is compatible with the general plan and the overall land use pattern in the area. Also, that the rezone will be, the property in question will be connected with property that was recently rezoned to be a part of that development, and that this will tie in nicely 3, we've heard no public opposition or findings that would countervail the positive findings from the staff. That's my motion.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. We'll start with Commissioner Summercorn.
So just a clarification, this is a motion to recommend approval.
Recommend
to the
approval.
council, right?
Correct.
Okay. Aye.
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 We'll move on to agenda item number 4, public hearing for a text amendment to Kaysville City Code 17-31-2, accessory building. And turn time over to staff.
All right, I'm going to take this one. So this is in front of the Planning Commission. There has been many instances of confusion with this particular section of code, the way it's written, things in there that are not defined. And so this is our attempt to correct some of those unclear items in the code, but then also have another discussion about height of the accessory buildings. Currently, they are allowed to be as tall as the homes, which is 30 feet in all of our residential zones. I will say that one of the most frequent complaints that we get is when a neighbor builds an accessory structure, and the adjacent neighbor comes in and says, that's tall, is it meeting code? So I just thought the Planning Commission could have a little bit of discussion about that. And then a point of confusion in the code currently is whether or not an accessory building is allowed without a main structure on the property. And I think the way the code's written, it could easily be interpreted that it is not allowed. However, our practice here in Kaysville has been to allow them without a main structure. So a conversation about that would be also, we would like to have that conversation. And I have reworked the code to, if the commission would like to allow buildings without a main structure, I have a different draft of code that I could bring up and we could look at so that we ensure that without a main structure, the property still has room for a main structure at the future point in time where they come in and construct that. So what I'll do now is just go through what I had included in the packet, and then, of course, dialogue and questions. So one of the things that have been confusing is just required side yard. You have side yards, you have required setbacks, but we don't really have a definition that fits a required side yard. And so we're just clarifying that to include that we're not allowing those structures in the setback that's required of the side yard. So if your setback's 8 feet and you have 30 feet, as long as you keep that accessory structure out of that 8-foot setback, then you would be able to allow that. And then we also had some inconsistencies with building code, which requires a building permit for anything in excess of 200 square feet. The way our code was written, it includes 200 feet. And so we wanted to make that language consistent. And so we're not really in I or II, we're not changing the code. We're just expressing different language that then matches the one in item 5, which that's exactly what building code says, anything in excess of 200 square feet. So if you buy one of those sheds that they drop off at your house and it's 200 square feet, by our code, you would have been required to have a building permit. But building code would not require until it was 200 square feet and 1 inch. So we just wanted to clarify that. Another one would just be number 4, just is not clear about the location of, like how far of a setback it have to be to not have that stormwater runoff. And so we've added in at least 1 foot. And then if you go down and look at number 8, that's where, so number 6 and 7 were the same paragraph. And the way you would read number 6, at least the way I would read number 6, is that I cannot calculate how much allowance for square footage of an accessory building would be unless I know what the main building, the footprint of that is. And so that would lead me to believe that I can't have an allowance of an accessory structure if there's not a main structure there. And so I've separated out that one from number 7, which then just says that any accessory building shall not exceed 10% of the lot area. And then item 8 was where I just was clarifying that, you know, if and this is the recommendation that the Planning Commission wants to send to council, that we would not allow them, we'll go with that. But this was the attempt to kind of match what I think the code says. And then again, what I have done, if the Planning Commission would like to, and again, it's been our practice to allow them, so the Planning Commission wants to continue to allow those main, or those accessory structures to be constructed without a main structure on site. This is what the language that I would recommend. And so number 4 is the same as what we had, same as 5. I did some reordering, and actually I'd like to reorder all of these because I think they should be ordered in the number or in the amount of relevance that you have. So the most commonly questions are up at the top, or the most common situations are at the top, and then those oddballs would be closer to the bottom. But that said, we would indicate or include that you can have accessory buildings, but they can't exceed the 20% of the lot area, and that would be the cumulative total. So if you had a couple of sheds and then you built a larger accessory building, you ended up having 3, as long as the 3 of those structures didn't total more than 20% of the lot, they would be allowed. That is consistent language with the one that just said, that's now listed in there as number 6, that, it said an accessory building, but I've added single accessory building shall not exceed 10% of the lot area. And then down in number 10, I guess our practice has also been when we have allowed those accessory structures without the main structure, that we have required a site plan to show that there would be room left for a main building. And so again, if this is what the Planning Commission would want to recommend, then I think we should codify that we would require a site plan. And that site plan would either include the future footprint of the main building, or at least provide enough details with setbacks and the accessory structure location that we know that a main structure could fit on the lot. So I realized that was kind of a lot, kind of 2 different directions we could go in, but that's what I had, and of course, any questions I'll try and answer.
So Melinda, are you seeing problems with accessory structures being built in the city? What are they?
So the biggest problem, the biggest complaint that we receive as staff is just a neighbor who starts building a structure, and then the next door neighbor is like, holy cow, that's super tall and it's too close to my property. And so I think the height is one of the greatest complaints that we get. And then another complaint would be the proximity to the property line. And the way the code is written, you can see number 8. Anyway, the way the code is written, the taller your building is, the further away it has to be set back, right?
You want me to explain it real quick like I do to everybody on the phone?
Yeah.
As I got a little speech prepared for them, but stand at the property with a 12-foot stick up in the air, like a 2x4 sticking straight up, draw a 45-degree angle across it. So if you was right on property, you could have a 12-foot wall. Every foot you step in will increase your wall height. So you can have like a 14-foot wall if you was 2 foot in. You could have a 17-foot wall if you was 5 foot in. Then on the gable end, where the Snoopy house is, that would have to meet to the 45-degree angle. So you might have a building with the roof trusses going this way, 12 feet tall plus 2 feet or 5 feet. And then on the gable end, you might have to be 10 or 12 feet away from the back because you have to clear it. And so we found that gives a lot of people flexibility to build buildings that are tall enough for their trailer houses and their motor homes and stuff. And it still should kick it out far enough to make it so you're not looking straight up at a building. It's worked. A lot of times people just, once you explain it to them, they understand, I guess, but they maybe not be happy with it. But I mean, and then that will allow them to go to 30 feet tall max, but they'd have to have like quite a ways to hit 30-foot tall from the. Yeah. So if you had like an acre property, you could put right in the middle. You could have a 30-foot tall accessory building and park whatever you want in it. That's kind of how we've had it set up.
So there's a couple of questions I've got, and I'm going to go back. I mean, we discussed this a few years back on the height and the setback off of the lot line. The question I have is kind of a two-part. Obviously 200 square foot. I mean, that's obviously makes it a little easier if we don't have to permit those. But the question I've got is, are we seeing more buildings in the city being built on lots that are unused? I mean, is that an issue that we're having so that eventually when those lots are going to be built on, they're not able to accommodate a house or a structure? And then I think the second question I have then is, obviously this is kind of some cleanup language. Within this, I mean, what are we really trying to accomplish in cleaning this up? I'm just want some little clarification.
So good questions. I have not, Dan would probably better address this than me, but I haven't been aware of any lots that had an accessory structure and then a main structure couldn't fit. But I think that's due to the practice that we have had them submit a site plan before we approved that accessory structure. But like I said, that hasn't been codified. So if we want to continue to allow that, then I think we should codify it.
If I read this correctly, on my property, I'm 0.48. I could have up to almost a 40. I just did the math. I have like a 4,000 square foot building because that'd be 20% of my lot. I mean that's a fairly significant building. That's like 50 by 80 feet. And I've got several neighbors who've built structures that are like 30 by 40 on their property, and they go up quite high, and they're the same height, clear height as their houses. I mean, I'm starting to see this in my neighborhood. It's becoming the must-have kind of accessory, and we've had several. We've got one behind on the property line behind us. It's a metal building. It's a cleary barn that was just put up, and they do all kinds of activities in their stuff. And I mean, it's interesting to me to see the trend this is. I just want to make sure that are we trying to solve a problem before it's happening, or are we trying to clarify what's already in the marketplace so we're not creating further issues for Kaysville citizens?
Sure. So I think the answer to that question is that while we're trying to fix some of these inconsistencies and items in the code that are ambiguous, I felt like it would be prudent to have conversations about the height, because again, that is something that we get, I mean, even maybe a dozen complaints, and usually during the construction months, of people that'll call in and say, like that has to be too tall, and of course we go back and check and it meets code. So I just think while we were in kind of doing this housekeeping, that we would just have that conversation. The council did have a dialogue a few months back about external accessory dwellings or detached accessory dwelling units. And I think actually through that process, the mayor, I believe, had requested that we have that conversation. But I think part of the intent of why we wanted to have the discussion was actually height of accessory dwellings, or excuse me, of accessory buildings that weren't necessarily ADUs. And that kind of got lost in the shuffle of the discussion of whether or not we should allow external accessory dwelling units. And the council was not wanting to change code to allow those detached ADUs. But that has been a concern. And again, I think it's just worth having the conversation. And then same with, like I said, I don't have any personal investment or even professional investment of whether or not we allow accessory buildings if there's not a main structure already. I just want our code to be clear and easy to understand. Like a resident should be able to look at this code and understand and not have to call us because it's so confusing. Yes, and that's true, because we've gone around and Dan, me, and Mindy trying to understand, like, what does this code really mean? And of course, I'm coming in without the bias of the last 30 years of what has always been the practice, and I'm just looking more at the plain language of the code.
Here's my concern with having a building on there that's without having a main structure, is you're potentially inviting a commercial activity without being able to regulate it. I mean, that's my one concern, is you may have somebody say, okay, we're going to build an accessory building. We're going to, run a small business out there before we move in. Well, how then do we regulate that business? I mean, that's my one concern. I think there's a case to be made that how can you say there's a setback, or how do you even know the square footage on that? There's some real ambiguity. I would almost argue that until you have your main building, your main accessory, or your main main housing or build on the property, you're not allowed to build this, because then your layout has to be, your site has to be set. And I think that's clear. That should be clear, because some of those things should come from that. I may want to come in and say, well, we're going to buy this half acre, or this 3/4 acre lot, wherever it is, and we're going to put this on there, but we're not going to move in because we're going to hang back here. But I'm going to put my equipment in there. I mean, we don't want these to become some sort of pseudo commercial site.
Yeah, and I could see the potential of that happening, and if it did, we would just have to go do zoning code enforcement, right? Because we do allow home occupations, but if there's not a main dwelling, then you can't have a home occupation. I mean, I would have to look at code, but I think that would be a logical conclusion. So, some of the arguments to allow is that, if right up front you want this big detached garage or a pool house, it is easier to get materials in and into a back area of a lot prior to constructing your main house. In fact, one of my neighbors right now, they just put a fence up, and because they got a dog, and they're also now building a detached garage, and they're going to have to take those fence panel down that they just got put up. So, there are some positives about allowing that, and I think it is a very logical conclusion to say, how could you possibly allow an accessory structure? It's supposed to be accessory to the main building or to the use of the property. And so I think that's a logical conclusion as well, but either way, it just needs to be clear. And so the way I have, at least with, I think the way this draft on the screen is written, your accessory building can't occupy more than 10% of the lot. And so,
I would also interject and say this. There was a city to the north of us in the county here where there was an accessory building on the property, and it was occupied, and it burned, and 3 people were killed. This is during COVID. These are homeless individuals living in the building. This has been a couple of years ago. But the individual had done exactly this. He put a couple of sheds on there intentionally, and one of them ran a power cord out from his house. It was an adjacent lot. trying to house people, he's trying to do the right thing, and it caught fire. And I think that would be my other concern, is you don't want to be inviting a use that is incompatible with the neighborhood. And I think, we have a lot of good-hearted people say, oh, we'll just put that on there and house somebody in there. I think it has to be an occupied residence before you get that type of.
Can I suggest maybe an alternate viewpoint? I think allowing an accessory to be, built previous to a main dwelling, it does give you, as a landowner, flexibility, which I would appreciate. I can consider, thinking of the cost of building a home. If my son were able to purchase a lot and maybe start with a small garage, that would be fantastic for him, growing into and saving for a home. I just think it's nice to not tie your hands entirely. I would probably lean towards allowing.
So what is the practice, though, is if a property already has an accessory structure? Let's say you have some of these larger lots and they make a flag lot in the back and it already has an accessory structure. How is that treated?
Yeah, we've actually had some problems with situations like that. And at least, if we were to go through a subdivision process like that, we would work hard to make sure that we don't create any non-conforming buildings. But if the property, I'm thinking back to the rezone we did on Crestwood and Fairfield. And, but that was at the legislative stage of that, but we required that he was going from R18 to R16, and there was a detached building, and the setbacks would not have worked. And so part of the rezone, the conditions of the rezone were that he would have to cut about 4 feet off that building to meet the setbacks. So we do look at that, and I know there's been times where we've told people well, you can do it, but you'd have to tear a building down, and obviously that's not something a lot of people want to do.
But if the building was within the setbacks, is it something?
Yeah, so
If you wanted to keep that building and you were going to build a house back there, would you have to tear that down then if we worded it the other way to that you couldn't have an accessory structure before
I see what you're saying.
Or would there be sort of a grandfather clause for accessory structures
Yeah.
that meet?
The state legislature just basically approved a bill that kind of grandfathers in accessory structures
Okay.
prior to. So if it's existing, you can't deny a permit for another structure on the property if the other one is existing, even if it's not conforming to the current codes.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh.
I missed that in the session. So I guess the answer to that is no.
Okay.
They would not have to tear it down. And so in that instance, Will, if I'm just thinking out loud, but would you think that the conditions that we imposed on that rezone would have, with the R16, is that only at the administrative stage that you couldn't deny?
For which now? For the
Well, so the rezone that we did to go from R18 to R16, where we required the 4 feet to come off, does that code apply to the legislative step or just the administrative?
The one over there.
Carling, yeah,
Yeah.
on
I
Crestwood and
I know where you're talking. Yeah.
the corner of Crestwood and Fairfield. Okay.
He had to take some off anyway, or he would have had it on 2 lots. So we just made him meet this 2-foot setback or whatever for the accessory but he would have had to, because you can't have.
Because the lot line adjustment would have
Yeah.
worked.
No.
Okay. Yeah, so there's pros and cons to do both way, and like I said, I think with what we have up here on the screen, if we do want to allow them, the way this is written should alleviate some of those questions as to, well, how do you calculate it without knowing what the main building is? And so it's just a straight across, a single accessory building can't be more than 10% of the lot. And if you have more than one, you can't have anything that totals more than 20% of the lot. So that way you could have a pool house and then you could have a detached garage, as long as it didn't take up more than 20% of the total lot. So we're not including in the footprint of the main building in that calculation.
I've got a couple of comments. Just help me to understand if I'm reading this correctly. Is it possible to put an accessory building in the side yard as long as the accessory building also meets the setback? In other words, I've got a house, I've got 40, 50-foot side yard, and I want to put an accessory building that kind of comes up to the front of the house. Is it okay to have it in the yard as long as it can still meet the setback of the main structure?
That is, yes, the way the code is written, we would allow that.
Okay. Because I've dealt with a lot of these where somebody had an estate lot and they wanted to put an accessory building in the side yard, even in the front yard. Last community I worked in, we actually would allow an accessory building in the front yard as long as the accessory building met the front setback that would be required for the home. Because on some of these estate lots, they want to put a carriage house or something, so a beautiful kind of entryway building and then the house back on a driveway. And so we said, yeah, as long as you meet the front setback of what will be required for the house, but I don't see that allowance in here.
Yeah,
Is
so
that a possibility?
well, if you look at number 1 that's on the screen now, we are clarifying that as long as it's outside of the setback, then you can have an accessory building. However, it can't be in the front yard and it can't be in, actually.
That's my
or
question.
yard. Yeah, I don't know if we need setback in that. I'm just looking at that now. Required setback of a side yard, or I think we would actually take out that second setback, or yard abutting a street. So that, and then that goes, I mean, that's also a difficult one to, we've had some problems with that too. So,
And the reason I bring it up is because if there is a way for someone to propose something that doesn't meet code, they will.
sure.
And
I can answer how it is right now.
Yeah.
Right now, we wouldn't allow any detached accessory building in front of the house. That's how it is.
in front of the house, regardless of how far
Regardless.
back it is from
Right.
as long, even if it was super.
If your house was 80 feet back and you wanted to put a carriage house in front, no bueno.
Okay, that's my question.
Yeah, so it says right here, no accessory building shall be located in any front yard. And then this says required setback of a side yard.
Okay.
And then this is where I'm saying, I don't know if actually that second setback word in there makes sense. But in a yard abutting a street, so if your rear yard is on a corner, that could be a challenge.
Here's one way to look at it. If on any corner lot, if you have an accessory building that abuts the corner street, because any house on a corner has 2 setbacks, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the one opposite of the way the house faces, the side yard or rear yard, the best way to write it, in my opinion, is just that any setback that would be required for the main structure in that side yard or rear yard has to be met by the accessory building. So let's say you have a house that has a rear yard that abuts a street. You can't have a shed within 1 or 2 feet of the property line. It needs to be as if there were a house there. And same thing on a side yard. A house that's got an 8 or 10 foot side yard, we wouldn't allow that setback to be closer than what's required for the house. So that's just food for thought, because I think if there is a way that you can propose something strange, I've seen it. And accessory building rules can twist you in knots for years, because somebody will always, especially the more money they have, the more creative they will get. And you can't write a code for everything, but you might want to try.
I can tell you how that is, the way we have it right now too. So if you did have a corner lot, and you have the 25 foot in the front for your, and then we require the 20-foot side yard.
Right.
If you was building a building over 200 square feet, you have to be inside the 20-foot setback.
If it's under?
If it's over.
Yeah, but if it's under?
If it's over 200 square feet. If it's a garden shed, if it's a garden shed under 200 or 200 square feet or smaller, you can put it up closer than the 20 foot. If the house behind you, it's a backyard. If they have a front house,
Yeah, right.
then you can't put in front of their house. But if their house is like
A side yard.
if it's a side yard
Yeah.
or
A rear yard facing a side yard,
or, yeah,
they've gotta
then
be-
you could put a 200 square foot shed there, but nothing larger.
Okay.
That's the way our code is. I'd have to find it, but
All right. I wouldn't recommend it, but okay. On item number 4, it says, shall be at least 1 foot from the property line. You might want to clarify if that's the roof edge or the wall, because on some outbuildings, you'll have a roof that extends out from the wall. My shed doesn't, it's just flush with
right.
it.
But
if
we've
you have
got
a-
that addressed too. In our ordinance, it says, right now, it already says a foot back, you just gotta dig for it. And then it says our eaves must drop on your own property.
Okay.
Your runoff can't run onto somebody's property. And then if you're closer than 5 feet with firewall, then if you're closer than 2 feet, you can't have eaves.
You can't have eaves.
Right.
Okay. Just as long as it's clear, because, I mean, no drip is no drip on the other property, but if it says 1 foot and there's no clarification, you know, somebody might want to put up a shed that's really close, and
Right.
you have a minimum 1 foot with firewall, right?
Yeah, if they're 1 foot, they got firewall. If they're within 5 feet, they're firewall.
Right, per fire
And-
code, right?
For fire code.
Oh.
And then if they're 2 feet away, they can have eaves.
Right.
If they're closer than 2 feet,
No eaves.
the eaves, yeah.
Okay, good, that makes sense, that covers it, because that's another one that people fight over all the time.
Dan, where is that located in code? Do you know? Because it's not in the accessory building section.
You guys chat it up and I'll look real quick.
One other comment is that I would argue unequivocally that you should never allow an accessory building to be used without a primary use there. The reason being is that, once again, my experience has been that if there is a way for somebody to abuse the idea of an accessory building without a primary use, it will come back to haunt you again and again. I spent years dealing with one, and I won't go into detail. Let's just say that we had somebody who built a large accessory building. It had no residential use to it at all. And they used it for commercial use for decades. And they claimed they were grandfathered in. And it was a nightmare year after year to deal with various people who would say, this guy doesn't have a home on the lot. We'd say, yeah, you can. We tried and tried to enforce, and it was very, very difficult. Plus, we've had people propose something similar to what I heard earlier, which is, well, what if they could build a large garage and live in it for a while and then, then add the house later? Well, that's a primary use. If you set it up with kitchen and utilities and everything else, that is primary use. But sometimes they want to do it so small and hide behind it and say, well, it's 400 or 500 square feet, I just have 2 people living in it. So then cities come up with ideas that they have to have a minimum square footage. You can't build a house less than 1,000 square feet on the lot or less than 10 feet in height. Well, I've dealt with these again and again. And once you allow a building permit for a non-primary use on a building lot, you are in trouble. So it must be, the dwelling must precede that, because you'll have business uses, somebody will say what they're going to do, and then they move out, they'll express intent, give a permit, and then you're stuck with it forever. So I would just say no accessory use, no shed, no building on the property that is used without a primary use, because it turns into a business every time.
Paul, can I echo that? I mean, you're bringing back the memories from Davis County. We had 3 West Bountiful, these are all in county, Crestwood, and then one out by Clinton. Same thing, they build an accessory building and then occupy it as primary. And I'll tell you, Jeff Euler, nicest guy in the world until you mentioned those properties. And then it was fighting time because they'd gotten permits under different purposes, but were occupying the primary residence, had never built the primary residence. And I think we want to be very careful of that, because they were using those primarily as business opportunities, and then also occupying them. One mostly for the two of them were for rental, and the other was primary resident. And I won't go into, I mean, there's familiarity in some of the, for the one in Crestwood and stuff, but it's just, you open up a Pandora's box, and it can get dangerous. You can end up with fire hazards and some other things. I think we want to make sure that you have a primary residence established before you put in an accessory building.
Yeah.
I did find that Melinda's right. It doesn't say that in our code about the eaves. I'm mixing 2 codes. I'm mixing our fire code and what it says here, that any building closer than 1 foot the adjacent property line, the stormwater does not run off onto the adjacent property. It does say that. But then the fire code and the building department says, it was talking about the eaves closer than 2 feet.
Okay.
And the 20% windows and all that stuff. That's building code. I merge into.
I also noticed that on, it says, this is before the after amendment on item 2. It says the property owner must obtain written permission from easement holder, and I think that's really wise. That question would come up all the time. Utility companies would get frustrated with cities saying, how come you allow these large accessory buildings, really big, substantial buildings in a side yard or in a rear yard where there's a PUE, without having them talk to us? Because you guys just give the permit and say, hey, go enjoy your accessory building. But you may not understand the secondary consequences from the utility perspective is, we've got a major line under there. The city planner, whoever's issuing the permit, they don't know what facility is in that PUE, and they may be allowing a permit for a structure that's going to really cause a nightmare for the utility, because the utility will just come right in and they'll just cut right through that. They'll just tear that thing down. So word of the wise is more communication is better than less. And I like that there, especially with its, and I would probably write it differently. I would say, well, you have it for a PUE, but probably a minimum 5. I don't think I've seen PUEs less than 5 feet. So
Yeah, and we try to be really careful. We got the GIS map.
Yeah.
Anytime I talk to anybody on the phone or site plan, I pull it up. I'll pull up all the utilities. If there's like a storm drain or an land drain, I have them call Logan. If I show something, I will make sure. I don't catch everything,
Yeah.
but I make as good as short as I can.
Yeah.
And then we always explain that to them, that if they
Yeah.
build within the,
Yeah.
somebody could come in and.
That's really smart, to put that on your paperwork or at the
Right,
counter.
and then they usually know that I make sure we talk about that, and I do try to be careful, but I might miss something one day, but.
Yeah, well, that's wise, that's wise. It saves real problems in the future at times. And it keeps the relationship with the utilities respectful.
So, commissioners, where do we want to go with this? No, I'm not ready for motion. I think we kind of
I
discussed.
can't wait till you type it.
Well,
No,
and
we've kind of discussed around. I mean, I think, we've got some good suggestions.
if the
What's the
commission
feeling?
wants to, yeah, we will need to have a public hearing, but if the commission wants to, give direction to staff to go refine some things and bring that back, happy to do that. Like I said, I kind of hit you with two different versions here tonight. So I knew coming in like this would kind of be a bigger conversation, and we may want to take a couple meetings to do it. I think some of the proposed changes, right, they're obvious ones to make so that we just don't have that confusion. But these other conversations, they do take a little bit more time.
So why don't we open up for public hearing since it is advertised as a public hearing?
Yes.
So I'm going to open up for public hearing and invite anybody who's here for this to address this item. Seeing as there is none, we will close the public hearing and move on. So again, commissioners, we have the option. We can advise staff to go back and rewrite. We can kind of bring it back again. We have some options here. What is the mood? What's the flavor on the commission?
I have just one thought. Is there a way with the wording where it's saying that, you could potentially build an accessory structure first? A way we could word it so that the main structure is built within a certain time frame? Once that accessory structure, so if they're wanting to build the detached garage first before they build the main structure, if there's
That's really hard because
Yeah,
what if they don't
wondering
meet
if
the time frame? What do you do then? Make them tear it down?
Yeah,
And
that's
the other question I have is, would they have to be permitted first for the main structure? Because there's always a time limit on that. And so if you're permitted for your residence, and then you're going to build the other one, so you have two permits going on at the same time. Could we do that potentially? But I don't know what the ramifications are of that.
Well, and I did in the version that we put in, I think I did say unless the main structure is constructed or under construction. Commissioner Shepard, I think that suggestion or that question about could we implement a timeline, I think that would be very difficult for staff to track and regulate. And then as Wilf said, the problem becomes, well then what if they don't do it? In my own neighborhood, and I don't live in Kaysville, just for the record, but the planning commission granted a conditional use permit based on this person was going to build a detached structure to store their equipment, and it's been 5 years and no detached structure has ever been constructed. So, right, COVID hit, interest rates, whatever those issues are, I think that would be very difficult. So we could, but I think the tracking end of that and the regulatory end of that would be very hard and not make sense to put that in.
I'm going to bring up the pool example. I know with swimming pools in residence, I'm looking at another residence out of state a while back. You could potentially dig a pool, but you had to cover it back up. You'd put your deposit down, and I kind of think it's the same thing. But you have to be able then to access it later. It was interesting having that conversation. Yes, you put your deposit on the house. Main residence has to be, I think they said structurally it has to be 75% complete before then they'll come back and finish the pool. And it's a financing thing. And I think, and then the city then tracks that with the permits. But I don't think we really want to make staff go through any more steps. I think we want to be as clean cut and clear on this as possible. And there's some reasons why cities do that and stuff, and why the financing now is done at the same time. So there's a lot of moving pieces when you're doing those types of things that can really bog staff down.
Can I tell you just a little story real quick, and then I'm going to shut up. But I'll tell you what brought this up. Kind of is a gentleman bought a property on West Kaysville, zoned RA. He wanted to put a 250-foot horse shed for his horse. He bought it exclusive for his horse, and he wanted to put it. And I went through all the code, and I thought, yeah, you can. And that's what brought the discussion up. And then the other thing is there's some people like, I know a guy up there, I don't want to say where he was, but he had a lot, and he's got a lot, and he got come in a few years ago, got a conditional use for a horse, because he had plenty of acreage, and then he owns a lot next to it too, and he put a little lean-to on it for his horse, and then now he's going to build a house on he's selling this house now. But there is a lot of circumstances where somebody can build a building and it's legit and it doesn't, and you'd hate to ace somebody out or something like that too. Or they own a house and they bought the lot next door and they do want to put a swimming pool and they want to put a pool house on it, and you don't want to make them have to consolidate it if they, There's a lot of times when the flexibility, would benefit the city and the people to have an accessory building first. I just wanted to say that. I'm done.
Okay.
Can I make a recommendation, a motion? I'll make a motion that we continue discussion on this issue, and I'll accept friendly amendments or suggestions from other commissioners on this, but that we continue discussion for the time being on this amendment and request staff to clarify on some of the issues we've raised this evening. Do you have a good grasp for those, Melinda? Okay.
I think so.
Okay.
And then I would like to add specifically, I'd like to make a kindly request that I think will take a little bit of work, but I think will be very useful to the staff. Number one, could I suggest that you look at, if you haven't already, the accessory buildings, accessory structures, ordinances of a few other cities. They don't have to be nearby. I'd suggest Wasatch Front, but maybe 3 or 4, and kind of glean from them the best ideas that you can see that would clarify and follow the intent of what you're trying to do. And then number 2, I'd like to request that you, if we don't have these already, that you have graphics. Graphics can save so much time and effort for staff, so that you can either borrow graphics from another ordinance or create them with software that show how, because this language, as somebody who's dealt with this a lot, I have to read and reread, not because it's poorly written, but because my mind is trying to place it, right? So a picture is really worth 1,000 words. So 2 suggestions for the continuance. That's get some good graphics that are showing what we want to do, And once you put on the graphic, that'll really help you see what the possibilities of pratfalls or mistakes might be with it. And then number 2, just check some other codes, because a lot of cities are dealing with this. And the city that I used to work for, we spent so much time on this. And we had some really creative rules that we came up with. So you might want to look at that one. But that's my motion, and I'd welcome any suggestions along that line.
Motion, do we have a second? Any friendly amendments?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Summercorn. We'll start the voting with Commissioner Allred.
Aye.
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 Thank you.
Who was the second?
Summercorn.
Okay. All right, thanks.
And one other thing, I didn't mention earlier how much I appreciate the staff and your staff reports. I really like the way you do your staff reports. They're crisp, they're brief, they're to the point, and they really give us good information for conclusions and findings. So thank you for doing that. Appreciate Melinda, your leadership in that, and staff members for your clarifications tonight.
Yeah, I'll echo that, thank you. We have approval of minutes from March 14th. I know that we had a discussion, that we needed clarification. I will turn over staff where you wanted that. Do we want to do that now? We needed a clarification on the motion.
The motion for Charlie's
Car wash.
I mean, it was talking about times of day. So I think the main question was on, so this is page 16 of the packet. I don't know what page of the minutes, but it says from 6 a.m. until sunset and/or closing, the sign can operate at 100%. So I think we were looking for some clarity. Is it meant to be and/or? Is it meant to be until sunset? Or is it meant to be closing? And again, given the time of year, sunset for a few weeks may match up very well to the closing time, but other times of the year, it could be 2 or even 3 hours off.
If I remember right, the Charlies, they said that even when they operated at 40%, their sign was still pretty visible. So I think, my thinking on that was that it was meant to be sunset or closing, not and/or.
So would that be, would that be an and/or from Commissioner Summercorn?
So sunset or
Or
closing,
closing.
whichever
Yeah, whichever's
Whichever,
later.
okay.
whichever is later? Okay.
So would you like to amend it so it just says, from sunset or closing?
I think so.
Okay.
I thought it was more closely aligned with sunset, so if they're closing at 8 o'clock, and I think they closed at 7 in the winter, is that right?
Yeah.
Do you want that dimmed at 5 o'clock if that's when, or?
Yeah, because right in the winter months, sunset
So
is
it's
around
dark
5,
and your
5:30.
Sign is too bright,
Yeah.
would be the concern.
So, oh yeah, so maybe it was earlier, whichever one is earlier.
Whichever's,
Well, and I think I recall there was some discussion about like summer, trying to maybe gauge that with
Yeah.
summer months versus the fall, winter months, but,
Yeah, I think some of the discussion is trying to be flexible with the owner, because he'd been, fairly flexible on this, so
and there was another part of the motion, right, the third bullet point that just said for 2 hours after sunset until 10 p.m. it can be at 25%. And then 5% overnight.
okay. Are we good with those changes, Commissioners?
did we change it?
So is the motion then, is the motion to take the and/or out and just put from sunset or closing? Because when the motion was said, it was and/or. That's
Was
how
it?
That's
That was
how it
actually
was said.
stated.
So, yeah, I went through it, listen, and it was the and/or. But I didn't know if that's what the intent was.
Yeah.
And interesting how all three, like, it all was perceived maybe a little bit different. So just in order to help him, the store owner, be clear, we're clear. It makes it easier.
Well, is and/or different than or? It's and or, correct?
Yeah, it's either
You don't have to do both. It doesn't have to be sunset and closing. It could be sunset or closing.
Yeah, so it should be.
Isn't that essentially the same
It should
thing?
be or.
I think it should be or.
It should be, yeah, you put it to words what I was just thinking
Whoa.
there. It probably should be or because that's the more flexible of the two.
I think so. I think it should be or.
So,
From 6 a.m. until sunset or closing,
Would you want to say which is ever later? So
whichever's,
from sunset or closing, whichever is later.
or whichever is earlier.
Or earlier, yeah.
I'd really say earlier. Can operate at 100%
Or is it too
and from, from sunset or closing until.
Right, because the problem is in the dark hours, it's
Brighter.
super bright.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So it would,
Sunset.
Yeah, so then if it closes before sunset, the lights can dim because they're closed. And if it closes after sunset, the lights can dim at sunset. Does that make sense?
Right.
correct.
yeah, so
Either way,
I think the
it's
intent really was that it'd be
almost-
sunset or closing, whichever is earlier, for all of them.
Okay.
From
So-
sunset or closing, whichever is earlier.
Yeah.
Okay. So if we are good with that, then I would move for approval of the meeting minutes for March 24th, 2044, unless there's any other amendments that need to be made. Do I have a motion?
I would make a motion to approve the minutes with the amendment stated concerning Charlie's Car Wash and the hours for dimming.
Thank you, Commissioner Allred. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner McCorn. We'll just all do vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any against? Okay, move forward. Other matters before the commission, reports, correspondence, and calendar. And before we get going, I have to say, Wilf had me up on, I was telling this earlier, had me up on the dais at the Utah Land Use Institute and showed how not to run a planning commission. And it was enjoyable. He had Brent Bateman there running as the applicant. And if you don't know Brent, who's a land use attorney, Brent usually is very professional. It was the only time I ever seen Brent act goofy. It was one of the funniest things I've ever seen, but it was a very good way to go back and see, if you can go back and see the recording, how not to run a planning commission. I mean, I have to go back and echo Commissioner Allred. I mean, having a staff report is critical. We didn't have a staff report. Being able to declare any kind of conflict of interest. I mean, all the things that we do here were not done there.
Yeah, we tried to do everything wrong.
There was no general plan announced. There was, I mean, everything wrong was done wrong. It was well done to show what not to do. So kudos to Will. It was a great conference, and I appreciate the time and the training. It reinforces the fact that we do things in a fairly orderly manner here, and we have good leadership and good staff. So thank you.
so great news that we were able to have a few commissioners attend the training. And we did want to let you know, we can email out, we have a travel form that we could email to you so you could put down your mileage, submit receipts on the lodging, and we can do a per diem as well. And that's all on the spreadsheet, but we're required by law to have you attend these training sessions, and so I think it's appropriate for the city to pay for those travel costs, and it's nice when we can make those meetings close by home, but sometimes, it was great that it worked out for a few of you down in St. George. A little kind of fun, exciting thing, we have our new state flag that was just put up this week, and we have about a month before our next meeting. So the council has canceled because of spring break, they don't have their first meeting in April. They hold their meeting the second week. So we get bumped, and then we'll just have one meeting on April 25th. And was that the one that you were going to be?
Yeah, I'll be out of the country.
Okay, so Commissioner Shepard, if you're able to attend as the vice chair, you will get an opportunity to chair the meeting.
Excellent. Excellent.
So, yes.
And you can come to the Planning Commission Chair Training meeting on April 8th. It'll be available on video.
That's the day of the rapture when all the.
Yeah, that's true.
When we're going to get.
Well,
Eclipse.
that's just over in the Clearfield City Hall, so that's a nice one that's close by.
It's going to be recorded, so
good.
you'll be able to watch it
Okay.
afterwards.
I'll do that.
I did let you all know that we received that transportation, it's a TLC Transportation Land Use Connection Grant from Wasatch Front to do the small area plan for our city center. So I struggle with this, but maybe I really actually am a planner after all to be able to get that grant awarded. So it just wasn't my undergraduate, my background, and but of course I've been doing this for long enough to have a decent handle on it. But that's really exciting. I think the time frame that we'll be looking for on that is to try and do the scoping for the RFP later this summer, and maybe get a consultant selected around the 1st of October. So we're wanting to give a little bit more time to get hopefully get a city engineer hired, and we're kind of double tasking in a lot of ways with that position being vacant.
Do we know who the consultants they recommend are?
So we'll put an RFP. Wasatch Front helps you put the request for proposals out. I've already been contacted by three different consultants. Like, they publicly announced that on Thursday, and Monday I had 2 emails, and I had a second on Tuesday. So I would assume I'll probably end up with a few more, but I did respond to them and just say, look, we're kind of working under some constraints right now with staff, so loop back with me this, in June. So that'll be, but I think this is fantastic news for the city. It really will help guide what the residents want, what the business owners want our city center area to look like, and hopefully bring more cohesive development than these kind of piecemeals that we've been having here and there. So I would expect that process to take a year, 9 months to a year. So I think 9 months would be pretty aggressive, but so hopefully we can kick off this fall and have something final by the following year. But that's something that as planning commissioners will want you to be involved in. So it's your role to recommend that plan to the council. And so we'll have some extra meetings, some public involvement opportunities, and like I said, stakeholders with businesses, and really trying to just dial in a lot of the vision that just kind of just get that more refined. So,
Perfect.
Commissioner Summercorn, it looked like you had something to say.
Well, no, but I mean, the one question I was just going to ask you, it's kind of related to that, is what's happening with the old library/city hall building? Is that moving forward at all, or?
Yeah, so we had a meeting with them on the 13th, I think it was, and have gotten to a point where they're out looking for financing, and we have a lease agreement, a good draft of that we're reviewing. We finally have the plat to do the subdivision of the property, so we'll be working on that, and of course once that's subdivided we'll bring the rezone. We actually right now have 3, and I don't know if I went through the subdivision page. I think I did with us last time. So right now we have 3 active subdivisions. Tomorrow we'll probably get a 4th sign out. So we have the subdivision down at the Hope Box, which is just to correct a mistake that was made with issuing a building permit for an accessory structure. We have the West Gate Phase 4. They're applying for an amended plat to take between 5 and 8 lots out, and then those would be done at a later Phase 5. And then the other one is the Flint Acres mixed-use project that's just north of Smith's. So we're accepting public comments on those right now through our subdivision page, and those QR code signs are out there. And then I would anticipate that tomorrow we will have a sign out on the Holland Development mixed-use project over by Charlie's Car Wash and Taco Bell that will accommodate the hotel, and so they'll be subdividing that into 4 lots. So we have a lot going on, and we ordered 5 sets of signs, and I'm a little hesitant to even do the other library one in case we have another application that comes in that, you know, we're not going to beat ourselves up if we don't make a 15-day time frame, whereas a private party may. So, yeah, but we have a lot going on. Just trying to keep up with everything that we have going on.
One item.
Go ahead.
For just calendaring, if anyone is interested in the Connected Communities Summit, that's put on by Bike Utah, Move Utah, and Get Healthy Utah. That's in September. The early bird pricing ends the end of this month, so just a couple of more days.
You know, I'm sorry, I didn't ever get back to you, but I had reached out to them and asked if they had any type of a draft agenda, and did not hear back. And when I checked their website, there wasn't much information, and so.
I haven't seen it either.
Yeah, I mean, I want to say yes, we would love to have you attend. I just don't know how relevant it may be. But what were the registration fees? Do you remember?
The early bird pricing was $125. I don't know what it will go up to. It didn't
Okay.
say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. But we will
Just
have.
to be aware.
Yeah, we will have in September the fall APA conference. Is that in September or is it in October this year?
Yeah, it's in September.
In September.
There's also the spring APA, which will be in Cedar City in May.
Yeah, yep. That's the first week of May, so that could be another opportunity. They usually, is it a Wednesday, Thursday, and a half day, Friday is usually what it is. So I think we've sent out that information, but we could send it again. Did we register anyone for that?
Excuse me, Commissioner Young, proper title. She is registered. And that was the only commissioner that was available at the time. So if you are available, I can still get you registered, so.
Yeah, and they do a great deal for our planning commissioners. They really kind of undercharge for that registration, knowing that, right, I mean, you're usually just doing this as a side gig, and your professional planners are required to pay more, but the planning commissioners are, I think it's only $75 for a registration, so it's a pretty nice deal. But yeah, that one in the fall, where is the one in the fall?
In Provo.
In Provo, okay, so that's a little bit more doable. I know it's hard with, schedules and work and kids and family, so. Provo's a little easier to get to than Cedar. And you also can register for just a day, so there's that option as well.
So maybe you'll want to, maybe you'll just want to wait for the agenda to see which ones are applicable to you if you can't do the whole thing.
And just remember, it's a 45-minute flight to Cedar. Come on. The flight gets down there like 8 in the morning and it leaves at 4 in the afternoon. And they do have a taxi in Cedar. There's 2 of them.
It's like a little
I've flown to Cedar before and back.
Try it out.
It's better than the 3-hour drive down and back.
Well, I think that's everything I had, unless, I don't know if the planning commission had anything wanted to add, or.
No, thank you to staff. Appreciate all you guys do. Appreciate your time and preparation. Makes these meetings go much better. And just so you know, the mayor is watching. She just texted me.
Hello, Mayor.
Anyway, and just know April 8th is the solar eclipse. So that's what I was talking about. We will, if I have a motion to adjourn,
So moved.
thank you, Commissioner Allred. We will adjourn until next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.